Hey there, listeners. Well, I had an interview with a guy called Scott Ritzheimer. Now, Scott himself has helped nearly 20,000 new businesses and not-for-profits grow and do really well. In fact, he founded an organization called Scale Architects to help founders and CEOs identify and implement the one essential strategy that they need right now to help them get on the fast track to predictable success. Sounds really cool, right? Now, here was a great interview with Scott, and we talked about all sorts of things. But the question is, how are you showing up as a leader today, but also in the future? And we talked about your team and people within your team. And he mentioned the thing about you'll never outpace your team. So something worthwhile for you to listen to in that episode. But if you can create more success, then you're going to create more opportunities, is something else he said. And then the other thing is, if you can recognize faster how to evolve, that's going to help you and your team and your organization. So let's get into the interview. Enjoy.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you here with us today. I've got a great guest with me. His name is Scott Ritzheimer. Scott, a massive welcome to you.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. I always like to tell folks that a podcast changed the course and trajectory of my life. And so there's always this kind of moment of anticipation right as we hit record where I wonder, hey, could this do that same thing for somebody else?
Yeah, I'm sure there's somebody listening to this right today that could be the one thing that could help them grow their business, their leadership, or help them change things in life. Do you know what? This is something I actually say, Scott, to people when I'm speaking on stage or I'm facilitating an event or even coaching, take notes. And they're like, I go take notes. Make sure you're taking notes all the time. A leader does that. And then I ask them, do they know why? And it could be this one word, this one comment, this one experience, this one quote, something that could be the thing that changes things going forward. And I like what you just said right at the beginning, right up front. It could be something that could be changed, help things move along, which is very good. Hey, Scott, well, I've given it an introduction to you, but before I do that, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're just coming up on summers, which here in Atlanta are hot, and I love it. So it's getting warmer and warmer, and I'm getting happier and happier.
Have you gone to daylight saving?
We have, yes. We're on daylight or Eastern Daylight Time. Although Congress keeps telling us they're going to quit. And I will rejoice the day that they do because it messes me up 2 weeks out of every year.
Oh, yeah.
Springing forward and falling back, it gets me every time.
Yeah, it does. Well, we're going back very soon. We're going back 1 hour. So we're going into autumn now, or into fall, as you call it, in the States. So we're going that. So it's a different part of the world here and than it is actually in the US. But it's amazing how we all experience different things. So do you love spring? Do you love that new start?
Yeah, so spring means pollen here in Georgia. Anyone who knows my voice can hear a little bit of that in here. So I can't say that spring's my favorite. I like it hot. I like the summer. That's my happy place.
Excellent. How hot does it get?
So Celsius gets into 25, 30, maybe 35 on an odd day, but it's just around that 25 to 30 as the high most of the summer.
Right. Okay, excellent. Well, it gets up there. It's interesting. So a little bit of background about you. What do you do? I mean, I understand that you're the founder of Scale Architects, but I want you to sort of explain to the listeners what you do. But tell us more about your background, where you've come from, and so forth. So, yeah, let us know.
Yeah, so I was 21 when I founded my first kind of real business. Me and a business partner, a whole saga that went into that. Wasn't really intentional at all, but I find myself there September 2008, right? Not a great time to start a business. And he and I are trying to make this thing work. And I was every bit as young and dumb as you would expect from a 21-year-old. I just made all the mistakes. And it's one of those times when we succeeded largely despite me, not because of me. And we did it through just grit and determination. It's that classic entrepreneurial story. We were working out of my business partner's basement for a while, and then we got kicked out by the homeowners association. It was just like a series of just silly things that we did, but it worked really, really well. And these numbers still sound fake to me. I haven't even found a way of convincing myself that this is true, but it really happened. We helped start around 20,000 businesses and nonprofits. Like, again, even I say that all the time. We did it. It was a lot of work getting there, but that number is still such a big number. And during that same time, we were having double, nearly triple digit growth year after year. And it was just a ton of fun. I just fell in love with this thing we call entrepreneurism, with being a founder. It wasn't always easy. It was hardly ever easy, but it was a lot of fun. And fast forward probably 5, 6, almost 7 years of just doing this. And I started to fall in love with business books, read a lot on leadership, a lot on entrepreneurism, a lot on how to lead business as well. You know, Collins and Lencioni and Wickman are the big names here in the US, and learned a lot from that. Was able to apply a lot from that. And I think a significant testament to our growth was just our ability to take those things and apply them to what we're doing. But I remember one year we would regularly be in the mid 20s on our profit margin, and that was great. And one year dipped a little bit, and we're like, but just that happens. It'll be fine next year. Then it dipped again. And then we tried all this stuff. What about this or that? Or we tried to turn everything and dial it all in. And it dropped again the third year, the biggest 1-year drop ever. We got all the way down from the mid 20s to 7% profit margins, which at the end of the day, like, what we were doing was really meaningful and important to us, but a profit margin that low, and you're right on the cusp of, we might not be here if you follow this trajectory, right? And what was really, really hard about it is it wasn't that it just dropped to 7% because we weren't paying attention, right? It wasn't that we weren't trying to fix it. And as cool as I thought I was as a leader and a founder and a business person, all of that illusion went away. And I found myself just kind of like, what am I going to do now? And so we really didn't do a whole lot with business coaches or consultants in the early days. We didn't really feel like we needed to. And while they may have helped us move a little bit faster, I don't know that we really needed to go faster. We were going pretty quick. And so this idea of, hey, let's go out and find help. Let's go hire a coach or consultant or someone who can help us solve some of these challenges, get our profitability back so we can grow again. And so we went out, we hired 3 different coaches, coach, consultant, advisor, that whole gamut. And every single one of them failed us pretty miserably. In fact, I lost more money following the advice, the ill-suited but well-meaning advice of coaches than I ever did on any deal that I had made on my own. And there's a whole lot to be said about the coaching industry and how we use coaches and all of that, which plays a bigger role later in my story. But the thing that I want to dial in on here, the thing that was such a big deal for me was not just that I had bad coaches. It was that I had enough of them to feel like now I was really alone, right? Like, if we can't figure it out and we can't hire someone to figure it out, is this it? Like, is this just what we've signed up for from now on, that we're going to constantly be fighting this profit thing, that my leadership team is going to be fighting with each other? Because when it's going well, everyone gets along. But when it's not going well, right, you start like fingers are pointing and I feel like I'm babysitting and firefighting. And it was just a rather miserable time, quite frankly. Now, from the outside in, we're adding $1 million a year to our top line. We've got this multi-million-dollar business. It looks like it should be going great, but inside I felt like I was dying. And it was during a particularly bad month. I'm driving in my truck. And I hear this guy come on to a podcast with, I've got my American accent, you've got your New Zealand. We'll add one to the mix here. He's got this funny Irish accent. Now, he's a dear friend of mine, so I can say that now. But I think it was the accent that kept me on, because it was probably one of the more boring topics that you could listen to. But he had me just enough. And he starts talking about this idea of life cycle stages. And it was the very first time that I felt like I was on a map as a founder. It was the very first time that I felt like somebody actually knew what was going on. And so from a combination of his work and insight into how the challenges we were facing as a company and I as a leader and founder were changing. And I also, at the same time, I got connected with a local coach here in Atlanta who was just a remarkable person. And those two guys together not only changed the course of our business, we tripled our bottom line in 3 years, but they also helped me as a leader recognize my role in that. I had to rework how I spent my time. I had to rework my team. and who I had around me. And we had to rework our tactics. And in the course of that, again, we had this remarkable business transformation, which was awesome. But the real thing I got out of it was I fell in love with the process of that transformation. I realized that in going through that, my real passion was not the next milestone for our business. It was helping others to avoid the same pain and mistakes that I experienced. And so that's what got me into this business now. I sold that company and moved into creating this company called Scale Architects. And what we do is exactly that. We help founders navigate the stages of growth so they can show up as exactly the leader they need to be.
Excellent. Oh, wow. What an awesome story, background, what you've actually experienced as well. And originally, how did you actually get into leadership yourself? Or was it through the actual first business or was it something else?
Yeah, it sure was. Ripe old age of 21, I didn't really have any chance to do it before that. So it's like I was a captain of my middle school soccer team, I think. Yeah, but that was about it. So funny, the very first executive team meeting I was ever in, I was supposed to lead. Right? I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. It was probably one of the more embarrassing meetings of my career. I was awkward. I was uncomfortable. I felt way out of place. It was imposter syndrome. I made the whole thing about me when my whole goal was to actually make it about the folks that were there, to invite them into kind of our inner circle. Funny, it was just a couple weeks later, I saw Dan Cathy speak. He's the president and CEO of a big restaurant chain out here called Chick-fil-A. And a second generation leader. And he's just like that quintessential leader. When I saw him, they were going through a massive crisis at the company. And he was just the poise and the steadiness. He had every reason to make this talk that I was about him and about the things that were going on in his world. And he didn't. He took the time to make it about us. And those two experiences back to back, right? My failure and his success, just being able to contrast those, it was a remarkable lesson for me as a leader.
And isn't it interesting where we as leaders sometimes look at another leader and go like, oh, look at their success, look how good they are. And that's what we see them as. But you know what? They've probably gone through a whole lot of failure as well to get to where they are today for them to grow. Just like where you are today versus the leader at 21 years of age. How different are you from 21 years of age to today where you are as a leader? Is there a difference? What has changed for you?
Yeah, monumental. I was a royal pain in the behind. I don't know what rating we're going for here, but I'm a smart guy and I made sure everybody knew it. I could poke a hole in anything and I wouldn't hesitate from doing it. I thought that business was about having the best idea, and there's a place for that, 100%. But if you get there by trampling over everybody around you, you're not going to get the best idea next time or the time after that. It's just not a sustainable strategy. And so it took a while for me to recognize that you'll never outpace your team for any extended period of time.
Yeah.
And so I would say one of the biggest differences about me now is I used to ask, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And now I ask, who do I need to help me out?
Yeah. It's a good question, isn't it? Who do I need? I think a lot of people are worried about the how rather than who can actually do the work or who can actually make this happen. Yeah, I think it's a key question for people to think about. Yeah, excellent. Well, what a good start. Wow, that's some really good feedback and input from you as well. Now, here's a question for you. This person can be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
I'm going to just embarrass myself with additional Americanism here, but Lincoln has just always been a hero of mine. I'm not a big fan of autobiographies or biographies in general. I just like watching paint dry for me. I don't know why. Amazing people, but I really struggle to get through them. I've read multiple biographies of Lincoln. His life has just fascinated me. There's the obvious stuff about what he did for the course of American history. But I think the person that he was as he did that, the deep conviction that he led with, and by all accounts, his ability to use story, the man almost never answered a question, but he always answered the question. And he would tell these elaborate stories that had nothing to do with the question that somebody asked until the very last moment. And his ability to do that, his ability to challenge people in the most dramatic ways without stepping on their toes, right? And being able to shape the course of an entire nation. It's just really a remarkable, not just president, but a remarkable leader.
Yeah, very good. That deep connection, that the ability to actually use stories is very important. Today, for our listeners who are listening, and there's a wide range of different levels, right from C-suite through to aspiring leaders who listen to this podcast. What would be one thing that you think people should do in relation to actually help sell, help lead, help grow, help scale an organization?
So this always sounds really bad. It's not a bad thing. It's given me freedom to understand how to use story better. And it actually comes from a couple of places, but primarily a book by Seth Godin. It's called All Marketers Are Storytellers. And above the actual original titles, All Marketers Are Liars, and liars is scratched out and storytellers is written above it. And I think there was a freedom for me that came when I recognized that there's not a single true story that's ever been told. Right? Every story, the best stories have a whole number of facts filtered out so that they can communicate clearly. Right? What stories do is they simplify the complexity of life into something that we can discern, understand, and take action on. If you were to tell any literal story exactly as it happened, one, it would take you an eternity to do it, to say everything. You'd have to examine it from 19 different perspectives. So as long as we recognize that stories aren't inherently true, they're not accurate, right? But they are true. That's a better way of putting it. If I can tell stories that are true, I don't have to worry as much about whether they're accurate because they're speaking to a deeper principle, a deeper belief. And then the story is just there to help our brains connect to that, to help our emotions connect to that, so that we can get the inspiration we need to take the action that's necessary.
Yeah, very good. Good way of putting it. Thank you. And I like it the way that you say is to simplify the complexity of things, stories. And is that what you do in Scale Architects? Is that what you do? How do you actually help people have that predictable success in business and so forth? What do you do at Scale Architects to help them do that?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that we share are two big stories, two grand stories. One is the story of every organization. Every organization goes through 7 distinct stages. And more particularly for my work in the company, I work with founders. And to help them understand the story that every founder is walking out as well, what it does is it helps them to understand you have a lot about how leadership is changing, and we're going to dive into that. But I think one of the most important ways that leadership is changing is actually that leadership is changing for each of us personally. We're walking a road, and each success that you have pushes you further from the comfort of your current stage, right? And so while there's a big argument for how leadership is changing and how it's staying the same, the one thing that I can guarantee you is that how you show up as a leader, even if everything else around you is the same, just by virtue of you walking that road, how you show up needs to change. And so what we do is simplify the 1,000 things that people have heard they should be doing, right? And boil it down to the 1 to maybe 3 things that they actually need to do right now, based on the stage of their organization and the stage of their leadership.
Yeah. And that's a key as well. 1, 2, or 3 things they need to change, not 20 or 50,000 things, because I think that's where a lot of leaders trip up, as they try and do too much, where it's just keeping
Absolutely.
it simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And by saying 3 things, there's 300 that we're saying no to. That's really hard at first, right? That can be a painful process, that initial letting go. But when you look at the number 1, maybe number 2 reason why founders start organizations, businesses or nonprofits, is for freedom and autonomy. And you will not find that freedom until you learn to say no.
Yeah. And saying no, is it easy?
It's a muscle that you can develop to make it easier and easier. Saying no to some things is easy, sure, right? But what happens is, here's how the journey changes. In the very beginning, you actually don't succeed by saying no. You succeed by saying yes, right? The folks who make it through these initial stages do so by saying yes and finding a way to follow through better than the folks around them. That's how you win early on. But here's what happens. When you create more success, you create more opportunity. And you reach this tipping point where the number of opportunities presented to you starts to then dramatically exceeds your capacity to take up those opportunities. And your success goes from being defined by what you say yes to your success being defined by what you say no to. Steve Jobs made this famous when he talked about Apple didn't become great because of the iPhone. They only could do the iPhone because of what they said no to ahead of time, right? The BlackBerry, there were several different technologies that they just didn't pursue. And they understood we are at the level of success where we gain more success by what we say no to than what we say yes to.
And I think Apple's just done it again. They've just said no to the car that they're secretly creating to focus on AI. And that's where they've said, no, we can't no to that. And we got to go and look at and focus somewhere else, which is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's good. Really good points. Well, your favorite leader being Lincoln. If you were sitting on a park bench having a cup of coffee with Lincoln, would there be one question you would love to ask him?
I would say the thing that gets me, because when you're telling stories and you are omitting some facts and circumstances, you are leaving space for wrong interpretation, right? You're hoping that the person catches the right moral of the story. The question that would happen is how he had confidence to just leave it at that. Because even though I have my stories, I practice my stories, I've studied story, I still have this moment where I'm like, yeah, but I have to add to it. I have to tell you what the moral of the story is, right? And so I would want to know how he had confidence that the story had broken through, right? That he didn't have to go and paint between the lines, that he could give the folks the freedom of discovery themselves. I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he did it so consistently.
Well, I think, it's a good question, because I think the thing is that if you bite your tongue and hold, everyone's going to take that story and interpret it themselves differently, right? And they're going to interpret it based on where they are, where I think sometimes we want to give them the answer. We want to tell them what it means. And that's a good point that you actually bring up. Yeah. Well, it would have been quite cool to see what the answer was.
I'll let you know when I hear from them.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Leadership is Changing is the title of the show. When I say that title or statement, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, I hinted at this a little bit earlier, but I think when I look at leadership, there's a lot of things. Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. So when you look at the grand strokes of things, the core stuff's not changing. Everything around it's changing faster than ever. And so while there are differences in things like how employees show up or what we expect of bosses or even the return on leadership that's available to us today, that's, in my experience, that's not where I see people screwing up. I don't see leaders screwing up and hanging on to the leadership of the 70s, right? As much as I do, I see them screwing up by hanging on to the leadership that they needed 3 years ago, right? I see folks getting stuck in a stage of leadership that is no longer appropriate. It's like the guy who's in his mid-30s and still dresses like he's a teenager. It's like, you can move on, buddy. It's okay. That's not appropriate for you anymore. Equally, you don't need the teenager to dress like he's in his 50s, right? So for me, what I've really given myself to is helping leaders understand what their organizations need from them right now, right? The things that got them here. Marshall Goldsmith nailed it. What got you here won't get you there. Okay, what did get you here and what won't get you there? What are the specific, how does that change? And so helping folks to filter out what strategies are needed right now. That's where I see them messing up. But I think there's a bigger conversation, and I think it's really important. But when it boils down to the day in and day out, I think most people mess up on the fundamental blocking and tackling of their current stage.
Yeah, good points. Thank you. Scott, when you talk about scale in today's world, business world, or even life actually seems to be getting faster all the time. Technology, data, business, all of it, social, it's all driving it. What does a leader need to do today to be successful in a fast-paced, ever-changing world?
Yeah, I'll sound a little bit like a broken record here because I think it's that important. But I think more than ever, we have to know how we need to show up for our organizations. And the pace of change influences this in the fact that you can graduate stage to stage in months and not years, right? There are things that used to be journeys that were a lifetime can be condensed into 4, 5, 10 years. I was just talking with a gentleman on my podcast. He went from 0 to 480 million in 15 years, right? That was almost 30 years ago now. That's happening a lot. The number of unicorn IPOs from organizations that started in 2008, 2009 is outrageous. And so what's happening is, especially because of technology, especially because of change, the return on leadership is higher than it ever was, but the pressure to evolve as leaders faster and more astutely is going up. And so what happens is we achieve this rapid rate of success because of the world changing around us, and we trick ourselves into thinking that that's the formula, right? That whatever it was that we did at that stage is going to forever work. But the world keeps changing. Our organizations keep changing, and how we show up as a leader has to change as well. And it's a lot harder to change when things are successful than when they're failing.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Because we just don't have the impetus for it. And so where technology allows us to achieve these extraordinary results, it also robs us of the character that we need to develop during that time if we're not careful.
Yep, very much so. And that character is big in what we're having to develop and who we need to be to show up. Now, you've mentioned it a couple of times about 2008, 2009, global financial crisis, obviously around that time, then also the pandemic around the early 20s. So that's where we've seen a lot of new businesses being born, right? I mean, we saw a lot of businesses close, but we saw a whole lot of new businesses born. It seems to be when there's that crisis, when there's something going on, things start to, when people sort of pull the rabbit out of the hat or they go and design things. Will we see a lot more new businesses scale to those millions of dollars and success as a result of what we've just been through in the last few years?
Yeah, I think you'll see a couple of things. One, every time there's a crisis, yes, the number of new startups goes up. Now, the number of failures of new startups, it goes up faster, right? So what happens is a lot of people get into starting businesses that they should never really start in the first place. But the other thing that happens, and our story was a testament to this, is you're in a pressure cooker, right? When you start a business in a bad economy, there's zero room for error. And so those that succeed through those really difficult times, it forms something in them that you really can't fabricate. You can't manufacture. And so that's why you'll see, and it's going to take a few years for this to come into fruition, but there were, like you mentioned, there were a lot of new businesses that started in the challenges of this global pandemic. And it'll be interesting to see what happens because in many industries, business was wonderful. Here in the US, with the amount of money we pumped into the economy, most businesses were actually booming by the end of 2020. But if you were a restaurant, right, that started in February of 2020 and somehow you survived, right? I want to eat whatever you've got cooking because it's got to be something special. So we'll see, right? It's too early to tell what the lasting impact of that has been. But if you look back over several series of recessions and depressions, the businesses that were formed during that time become some of the bastions of the business world some 5, 10, and 50 years later. Now, you go back to the Great Depression, it took about 30, 40 years for that to happen. You go to the Great Recession, it took about 5 to 10 years for that to happen. So the turnaround time, the return on that pain and angst, if you will, early on, is getting faster and faster.
Yeah, so in other words, the years might be shorter, if I can put it that way, for it to actually grow and do well and the rate of return. Yeah, excellent.
That's right.
So we'll see that definitely happening, and it's amazing. I always see that those organizations that are able to battle and go through the hard times and then come out the other side are the ones that are going to be a lot stronger for it and moving forward in what we're doing in life and so forth. Yeah. We've been talking about leadership in that as well. And obviously in your organization, you've got employees, and employees' expectations of leaders changed.
Yeah, absolutely. A Great Recession created several, I think, permanent shifts in that respect. I think, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but it's not so much that they expected something other than what they expected before, but they had a boldness to demand it, right?
Right.
The level of those expectations went up. And I think what we saw was a difference between bosses and leaders. Right? What we expect of our boss and what we expect. So what we expect of our leaders hasn't actually changed all that much, but what we expect of our bosses, right? That transaction that we over relied on for decades, that has changed dramatically. And so we see this as organizations, there's a massive shift toward the employee, the individual, and what they need. And I think you're going to continue to see that in the business world. I think you're going to continue to see that in the legislative world. And I think you're going to continue to see the individual empowered more and more. Now, a really interesting dynamic happens, though, with that when you combine it with technology. And that is that the individual gets more powerful and the kind of super company gets more powerful, right? But what's becoming harder and harder is jumping the gap in between. The return, if you can get through those barriers, gets higher and higher, but being able to break through from the kind of solo shop or the $5 million company to the 50, 500, $5 billion company, the gap between those two is getting deeper and deeper.
Amazing, isn't it? What do you reckon is going to help the organizations do that leap? What do you reckon they might need to put in place, either be as an individual, as a leader, or an organization? What do they need to do to make that leap?
Yeah, without getting too technical, I think as leaders, again, we have to recognize faster how we need to evolve. You just won't have the time, right, to figure it out the hard way anymore. We need a shortcut. We need a way of jumping straight to the front of the line in terms of, hey, I recognize this is normally a 3 to 5 year period of just bumping around in the dark. I need someone who can show me how to do it in 3 to 5 months. And so I think the folks that make that leap are the ones who will invest in the right help sooner, right? They will be looking for people who have a clearer picture of their current state than they do. And if they can do that, and if they can gain the skill of finding those people, because it's not easy, it's not automatic, but if they can develop the skill of getting the right people around them, everything else will follow.
Getting the right people around them is one thing, in other words, employees or the team, but also going back to your comment earlier on about coaches or people to help you in your business and that, it's actually finding the right people to help you do that. And I'm going to encourage the listeners, if you're looking at engaging a coach or engaging some business consultants in that, or anyone to help you in your business, be a little bit smarter and a little bit more aware. And Scott, I'd like to get your kind of thoughts on this as well, is about how you actually get the right people on board. It's very, very important. What are your thoughts about having, what people should do, or one or two things that they should think about in getting the right people on board?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom in on the coach one because I think we're actually worse at this than the other. I'm going to presuppose that you have figured out the hiring thing, right? Not everybody has, but I want to just start from there because I've found lots of people who have figured out the hiring but haven't figured out the coaching thing. And the reason is they treat them differently. When you look at what it takes to find a great coach, it's like the work that you do to find a great employee. You have to go out and look for them. You have to interview them. You have to look at their credentials, not necessarily in acronyms after their name, but have they helped other people do what you're trying to do? There's lots of coaches who haven't done what you need to do. There's lots of people who have done what you need to do and they shouldn't be coaches, right? So it's not whether or not they've done it, it's whether or not they've helped someone else do what you need to do. And if you just do that, if you just take the time to interview them, make sure that there's chemistry there, and you have them show you where they've had the same success with folks that are in your same stage, having your same challenges, that's going to significantly increase the hit rate of success in hiring coaches.
Yeah, totally agree. As my business is about executive coaching, and it's about making sure that you are working with people who, as a coach, I always say to people, the chemistry, the rapport is there, definitely. Both ways, actually. It's not just you as the person looking to hire the coach, it's the other way as well. I mean, there's people that I've actually met with, I don't want to work with. And I've said, look, it's just not going to work because there just wasn't the chemistry there for me. Second thing is, as you said, the experience and what they've actually done. The credentials and all that, that's just credentials with some letters behind their name. For me, and I think it's what you're saying as well, is that the actual proof in the pudding, in other words, of what they've actually done to show you that they've done it before, to take you to that new level where you need to go to, is very important. Yeah. And I think there's a third element too, and that is that coach has the courage and the boldness and the ability to ask you questions that you need right now to get you to think more and stronger and better than where you're needing to go. I think that's very important. The other thing too, Scott, is you going to say something?
Yeah, I would add to that. I would add one thing from our posture when we, like I did, look to coaches to save us, right? I looked for someone to have like some silver bullet. Doesn't exist, right? We help folks achieve all kinds of radical transformations, but not as saviors, right? We just point the way. You're going to have to walk your own path. So when it specifically comes to coaching and consulting, you're not going to get some silver bullet in. You're going to get a light on your path. That's what you need to look for and hope for. The second thing that I would say, because I've interviewed around 1,000 coaches now, some very successful, some on the road to success. And the thing that separates great coaches from those that are on the path to greatness, right? Oh, put it in its best light, is actually one thing that surprised me. And it is a structured process. when I looked at, and again, I looked at a whole bunch of these, and there were all kinds of things. The rate that they charged didn't really matter. The quality of their website didn't matter. The logos that they'd worked with on their website didn't matter. The biggest things that separated them was primarily, one, they knew who to say no to, right? You made that point earlier. But two, that they had a structured process that they walked folks through.
Mm-hmm.
If you hire someone and they walk in and they say, hey, what's up? How was your last couple of weeks? It's like, that's not going to create the type of transformation that our clients are looking for. And so you want to find folks and ask them about the process that they use. Because if they're making it up as they go, it's going to last you about 3 months and you're going to get sick of them. That's about the lifespan of an engagement like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's both ways as well. Even for the coach, if there's no structure, it's just crazy. Sometimes that structure may be thrown out the window because of the person wanting to talk about something else, but still that has structure. There is still that structure, and that's that ability to be able to be flexible and do that as well. So yeah, it's really good. Now, we're talking a little bit about the future here, but where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Yeah. Again, I would turn this around, and I think if we individualize it, it becomes much more poignant. How am I going to have to show up as a leader in 5 years? Because if you go back and look at how you showed up as a leader 5 years ago, it better be very different than how you showed up now. So I think the biggest shifts that are coming are the shifts in your own story, your own journey. Macro technology is there, leverage is there, individual freedom is there. There's lots of macro things going on. But I think when you look at each of your individual listeners, the biggest transformation they're going to have is being a founder of a $5 million company is very different than being a CEO of a $15 million company.
Sure.
And if you're growing by somewhere around 12% a year, you're going to double in 5 years. 12% is not a huge growth number, right? If you're growing 20%, you're going to double in 3 years, a little bit more, a little longer. And so looking ahead, the greatest leaders I know are constantly looking ahead at who they're going to have to be in 5 years, how they need to show up, what skills they need to develop. And they're leading ahead of the curve as opposed to lagging behind it. There's a leader nearby. He's got this brilliant company. They're sitting around 1,000 employees, something along those lines. And when he was, I think, like 5 or 10 employees, and the thing really started to grow, he realized we're going to need to buy an office one day. And he went out about 4 years before he actually needed to buy an office and started creating relationships with some of the top realtors in Atlanta. And by the time came, he had the depth of relationship. He didn't need to scramble and figure out who to go to. He knew exactly who he was going to use. He had already had conversations with them. He knew how to process this type of an event. He is one of the best individuals I know at looking 5 years ahead and saying, hey, who do I need to be? Because if you're a founder, no one else is going to do that for you, right? You can have folks like coaches who will do it with you, but no one's going to demand that you change so that you're ready for 5 years from now, right? When you get there, they're sure going to demand that you show up the right way. But it's on you, particularly as a founder, to look ahead and say, hey, how is leading at this next level? And I ask this question to a lot of folks, and I'll tell you, 95% of them say, I don't know. I've never done it before. And how could you know? And so what are you doing today to get around people who do know, who can help you to develop those skills now while it's relatively easy instead of doing it under the gun when it's a whole lot harder?
Yeah, absolutely. And so listeners, don't wait. Start thinking about it, being a little bit more strategic about what Scott just said there about thinking about the future, but also develop the relationships, the networks and all that you need for the future as well. Build it before you need it is probably a key thing for you to think about. Scott, been a real pleasure talking to you today. Hey, if our listeners wanted to get hold of you, where should they go?
Yeah, so I wish it was as easy as saying, look up Scott Ritzheimer. But one, no one's going to be able to spell Ritzheimer. And two, I'm a junior. So there's two of us. So if you make it that far, look for the one who looks like he's 14. You'll have the right guy. But no, the best place is to go to scalearchitects.com. And if you go to scalearchitects.com/founders, my newest book there, it's called The Founder's Evolution. It maps out the 7 stages that founders go through. So if there's a founder out there thinking, I don't know what it's going to look like 5 years from now, you don't have to guess. I've drawn out the map. You can identify what stage you're in and the 2 or 3 things you need to do to actually move to that stage. It's been pretty crazy. Book came out in September. I've had lots of feedback by then. Folks have reached out. They've saved on average, not maximum, on average 10 hours a week doing things that they didn't have to do, recognizing they didn't have to do them, and being able to embrace the skills for the future. So head to scalearchitects.com/founders, save yourself 10 hours this week, and you'll have a whole lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Here you go, listeners. You'll never outpace your team, and how you show up needs to change. Create more success and creates more opportunities. But the big thing here for you all is invest in the right people to help you sooner. Hey, it's been a real pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.